Uh, Good evening and welcome to tonight's special talk and topic named as the principles of self-care. Just before this session, there's something I was kind of thinking about technology, that we sometimes cursing it how bad it is. But today I actually want to really thank the Zoom, especially for able to bring our special guest over to us, because normally we wouldn't be able to do this. And I just really want to say thank you. The topic we have tonight is a very special topic, and it's a really big topic. And for me, it's something that's a hot topic on everyone's minds these days. It's about self-care, especially for me. It's been a big topic, and I've really enjoyed the whole concept behind it and the whole meaning behind it. Because it's not just about our mind; it's also about our body as well, our mind, body, and spirit. And we have a very special guest named Judi. She's all the way from Canada. I'm just going to give you a quick background about Judi, which I've just been reading upon. Formally began her spiritual journey in 1992 when she discovered the Brahma Kumaris Center in her hometown near Calgary, which is in Canada. In addition to currently serving the coordinator for the Brahma Kumaris Center in Calgary, she's actually a graphic designer, a fitness trainer, and she's not only a contemplation are compatible, she has found the opposite true, together to create a sense of well-being when integrated. So, Sister Judi, I'm going to pass over to you, and we look forward to your joining us and sharing your inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Usha, for the lovely welcome introduction. Really warm greetings to one and all the way across the pond over here in Canada. I'm in Western Canada, and I know it's evening for you. It's actually lunchtime here. So this is a lovely way to spend the lunch hour, is with all of you. And I agree completely with what Usha was sharing. This is, to me, a super hot topic, self-care. And it's been on my mind so much through the entire very unusual, almost last 2 years. I really appreciate the opportunity to share on it here. It gave me, again, more time to reflect on it, the importance of it. And actually, in my mind, and my mind tends to fire sometimes in a quirky way, it was actually this idea of disciplines of self-care, principles, as well as really the disciplines of self-care. And that may have to do with coming from very much a fitness background where discipline is so huge. But this has been central in my focus, being involved in fitness, spirituality, really just quality of life has required very deliberate and intentional focus on self-care to maintain quality of life through these very unusual times. So we'll see where this talk leads us on that. And with respect to thinking of it as principles, yes, but even if we introduce the word disciplines. And I know everyone has mixed feelings around the word discipline. It's a word that I love a lot, but some don't necessarily feel that way. So I'm going to invite you just to take a moment. You don't have to put in chat or anything unless you want to, but just take a moment to reflect on how you feel about the word discipline, what your relationship with that word is, good, bad, indifferent. Just taking a moment to think or feel how that word discipline sits with you. And I have here some of the dictionary definitions of discipline. So if you found that you have a somewhat negative or aversive feeling around it, I can understand why, because these definitions don't really help the situation much. So As a noun, this idea of discipline, training that makes people more willing to obey or more able to control themselves, often in the form of rules and punishments if these rules are broken, or the ability to control yourself or maybe control other people, even in difficult situations. As a verb, discipline means to punish someone or the self, to teach someone to behave in a controlled way. There can be disciplinary action at work if you don't obey company rules, controlling the way you yourself live, work, or behave in the pursuit of a goal. So those aren't particularly pleasant. That word punishment, I think, has a certain feeling for us. But one that I like about discipline is a particular area of study, especially, for example, in college or university. And the word discipline itself comes from Latin, which means this Latin word discipulus, I believe is how it's said. And that simply means student. That's it. So using these different ideas of discipline, and for me, focusing on this idea of student, studying, understanding, can we start to maybe change our relationship with this word? Because to put it aside isn't quite going to help. It's actually quite necessary when we talk about self-care. And the definition I tend to work with, the feeling I tend to work with around this idea of discipline is how I choose to invest my time, my attention, my energy, even my wealth, my different resources, where I choose to invest it based on perceived benefit. And I'm going to stress the word perceived. So where I choose to invest my energy, time, resources based on perceived benefit, understanding there are naturally occurring consequences to every choice I make. So this is sort of the concept of discipline that I work with. And yes, it's been a huge part of my entire life. As a child, we were enrolled in dance, we were kept busy in athletics, but ballet training was a huge part of our upbringing. And that is one particular discipline, study, that certainly draws on the concept of discipline and being able to develop self-discipline, especially. And then coming into fitness and finding myself a fitness instructor, I now work at a lovely little boutique studio called Heavens. And the owner of the facility is a wonderful soul who had, prior to opening the business, been an elite athlete. She's a world champion in her discipline, which is synchronized swimming. I don't know if anyone's ever been involved in synchronized swimming, but it is notorious for having extreme training conditions. Usually they start very young. So imagine yourself as a young teenager in school. And in order to get pool time, they often had to have training at crazy times of the day, usually early morning. So 5, 6 o'clock before school. They're having to get up here in Calgary. It is freezing in the winter time. So imagine getting up early, it's freezing. You're going to go and get into cold water and just be trained, strong swimmers, crazy, multidisciplinary training. And then you're off to school. And so discipline is a huge part of her life, the owner of the facility. And so she and I, really spent a lot of time in the last couple of years kind of drawing on our own experience around self-care, because we were noticing that the membership, the clientele, was really struggling with self-care during the last couple of years. The fitness studio itself, there'd be times when it would have to be closed completely or partially open with restrictions. So the owner, Helen, and myself spent a lot of time together, often alone in the building, filming online fitness sessions or doing whatever was required to provide the resources for souls to be able to care for themselves. And quite frankly, there was no monetary compensation because there was such an economic struggle to keep businesses open. So we're basically there really because we're both so concerned about this topic of self-care. And it really did require discipline. You know, souls were at home. It's a very slippery slope when you're alone at home with your own mind, saying things like, you know, I don't have the space to work out. I don't have the facilities to work out. I don't have the time to work out. I'm really tired. Right? Very slippery slope. And we started to notice that there was this sort of shrinking of attendees to the various fitness opportunities provided, whether online or on site. We were really curious, what happens inside of souls that they're starting to lose that ability to care for the self, especially when outside supports are taken away and I'm sort of left with my own self to create that drive for self-care. And so we both were reflecting on it so much and started to notice for ourselves, we had to be far more intentional and very clear about what's involved in self-care, what's going on inside. And when we talked about this idea of discipline, we mentioned this concept of perceived benefit. So this is a huge part of discipline, is there has to be the perception of benefit. But there is a difference between perceived benefit and actual benefit. And there can be a massive gap between the two, or they can actually agree. And there's different things that can affect that. But just to give you an example, we have a member who I haven't seen for the last 2 years, but we have a member, and lovely young woman, and she has a sister, a younger sister, so they both come together. And anyone looking at them would say, wow, are they ever disciplined? Do they ever take care of themselves? Because on their own, they would come pretty much every day and do quite intense workouts on their own. So usually the older sister would lead and the younger one would follow. It would either be interval training, like really extreme boot camp, or indoor cycling together. So really every day they're doing these intense workouts. Now, they perceived that this was beneficial. This was good. And if they didn't, what would be the consequences? They felt their fitness level would go down, so their quality of life would go down. However, fitness wisdom tells us that to put the body through an intense workout every day is actually a little bit damaging to the body. It likes cross-training and it likes recovering. So although they perceive benefit in doing that, there may not be actual benefit. And there came a point when the older sister actually became an expectant mother. And as an expectant mother, one night she woke up in excruciating pain, excruciating back pain. Now, it is very common often for expectant mothers to have back pain. It's not that unusual given what's going on with the body. But this was really extreme, didn't know what to do. So the husband drove her to the hospital to address the acute pain. And soon after the follow-up, she went to visit her physician to discuss what happened, because of course she doesn't want it to happen again. So what care does she need to take in order for it not to happen again. And so she went to the physician expecting the physician to say, well, it's related to the pregnancy. It's just something that might happen. It will pass. But the physician actually said something interesting to her. Because when you watch her work out, there is the intensity of her workouts without any real recovery, but also she has a certain physical alignment. There's curvature that has developed, which happens with cyclists often, of her upper spine. So her alignment when she works off is really off, really, really off. And the core principle in fitness is that alignment is king, is everything. It's very challenging to take benefit from an exercise if the body is misaligned. So she went in to see her physician and said, is this just a result of the pregnancy? And her physician said, well, kind of yes and no. Yes, your pregnancy may be the straw that broke the camel's back, forgive the pun, but it's not the cause of the pain, the problem. And the physician said very clearly, it's actually the way you work out that led to your back pain. And so here she is thinking that she's engaging in self-care, this perceived benefit, that what she's doing is beneficial. She perceives that. And now she's being told there's actually harm in what she's been doing. And even though the physician told her that it's the way she works out, she did not stop. She continued to work out in the exact same way. So she is very disciplined in what she's doing, but is it attached to actual benefit? And this is a key principle in self-care, because we can engage in a behavior, a choice that we perceive as beneficial, but are we actually engaging in something that is truly beneficial? What's that gap between perceived benefit and actual benefit? What widens the gap and what can shrink the gap? And what actually widens the gap, and we see this so much in fitness, is usually one thing only, and it's called ego. So when there is ego, it widens the gap between perceived benefit and actual benefit. This is huge in fitness. Ego simply is valuing myself for all the wrong reasons. So of course we should value ourselves. In fact, it's going to be the seed, the foundation of self-care. But if I'm valuing myself for all the wrong reasons, which usually is connected to external validation, then I might start to make choices, that is, invest my time, my energy, my attention, and resources. I might make choices that, although I perceive are beneficial, the perception is being distorted by ego. As an example, there was one year where we had a challenge, and the word challenge already activates ego. We hear challenge and we hear competition. It's very interesting. So we had a challenge one year where part of the challenge, one of the elements was the number of push-ups we could do for time. So 60 seconds. How many push-ups could we do in 60 seconds? Now, 60 seconds sounds short. It's actually a very long interval when you're doing push-ups. It's a long time. So we're in this class and the instructor decides to split, have the men in the class go first and then the women will go second. And that may have given us an edge because we could watch what happened and make perhaps a different choice. So the men went first. They hear the word challenge. Ego is already getting active, getting very excited. And then, of course, you have the added element that we are watching them. And when we feel people are watching us, ego gets even more excited. So this is the perfect storm for a complete disaster. So what will we perceive as beneficial at this time? basically it's not self-care, but more like care of our image. Again, value for all the wrong reasons. So the clock is set. The clock is running and they start doing their push-ups. And all I can say is I'm not even sure what they were doing. They were the most odd looking push-ups I've ever seen, because when ego kicks in, it's always going to choose quantity over quality, which means they were trying to do as many that was the instruction. How many push-ups can you do in 60 seconds? Now, maybe if the instruction should be how many good, proper, or true push-ups you can do in 60 seconds, maybe they would have adjusted, but their perception, what they heard was literally the quantity of push-ups that they can do. So they were trying to fire off as many as possible. They looked like twitches or hiccups. I don't even know what they were. And at the end, they were very proud of themselves. So then it came the turn for the women in the class to go, and perhaps they learned from what they saw, because they set themselves up to begin push-up. The first thing they did was set their alignment. Some chose to do push-ups from their knees, which is absolutely wonderful. Really good alignment. So you could tell before the clock started, they were going for quality, as much care as possible. Timer went off and they started doing these beautiful, these epic push-ups that just looked wonderful. Not many, but they were of excellent quality. And the timer went off. So the men were very happy with themselves. They felt they had won the challenge. And the women were happy with themselves because they felt they had taken full benefit from the challenge. So this principle of really understanding the difference between perceived benefit and actual benefit, and what can widen the gap. Top of the list is ego, but also fears, attachments, desires, addictions can really distort the gap so we don't even see clearly. And this is one of the reasons I love this Latin root of discipline, discipulus, which means student. It actually also means pupil, because of course, I don't know why in English. Well, I do know why. It's quite powerful metaphorically, but we use the word pupil and student interchangeably. But of course, pupil is also part of the eye, the part that determines how much light goes in and out of the eye. And so really wanting to be able to see clearly if there is a gap, if there are things distorting what I perceive as beneficial, because I will then be choosing to invest in something that might actually be harmful or damaging to the self. And again, I see this so much in fitness, of souls really putting so much effort into stuff that may not be sustainable and over the long term even harmful. So this can happen in our lives as well. So important in self-care. Now, one of the principles around this concept of attainment or benefit in fitness, which I think applies for life, is that things always work from the inside out, from the subtle to the superficial or surface. This is a key principle in fitness. So if you take care of things on the invisible or the subtle or the deep level, then you get far more benefit as it comes into expansion. And the way that looks, if you talk to anyone who's been in the industry for a while, they will say one of the top things to focus on in fitness is alignment, the core. Completely invisible, there's no show to it. Even as you're sitting there right now, the only way you'll be able to stay upright, seated, is if your core is firing. Is it firing correctly? That's for you to determine. You may not even be thinking about it, but if it's not firing correctly, and Lord knows we've been sitting an inordinate amount of time in the many, many past months. So if it's not firing correctly as you're seated, you will start to experience pain. The body will experience pain, the signal that this is not beneficial, this is not caring. So really want to know what's going on at the deep level with the body and work from there. Sometimes we get more pillows, let's get a better chair, versus let me figure out what's going on at that deep level and build from there. So in fitness, we work so much on the core, the stabilizers, the alignment, structure of the spine, and then that's your foundation and you progress from there. However, what you will find, at least we do in our studio, is all of the classes that focus on alignment, they're called mind-body classes, are consistently smaller in size. In fact, most of them don't even break even financially. So they're being subsidized by the more popular ones, which tend to be the HIIT classes, the interval training, the cycling, all those athletic classes. But the mind-body classes, the alignment classes, are notoriously less attended, smaller in size. It's a very, very small segment of the population that recognizes the importance of alignment when it comes to movement. And when you walk into an alignment class, it literally feels like a meditation studio. The level of awareness these souls develop, and introversion and attention and care in the management of the body is remarkable. It feels like I'm in a room of open-eyed meditators when they're taking class. It's such a powerful atmosphere. So working from the inside out is a key principle of care when it comes to movement. And I think this is the principle in general for self-care. When we talk about self-care, there's a few different aspects. There's the physical, which has to do with the body, and that can include nutrition, all the resources required in my physical life, so finances, facilities, etc., care of all these aspects, so the body. And then there is mental, and that's the mind. Then there's emotional, which might relate to the heart. And then there's spiritual, which relates to the self, the authentic self. So these are the different dimensions that we want to care for in our life. And it might feel like, oh my gosh, how do I pay attention to all these things? How am I going to be able to do this? Where will I find the time? Now, the beauty of it is that these aren't sort of four separate elements. I think of them like the concentric rings of a tree. So if you have a tree, and we're not going to do this, but if you did cut it down, you looked at the stump, you would see these concentric rings. That's how I think about these different aspects. Just like the physical body, if I align the core, the deepest level, the rest will start to take care of itself. So if I can focus on the very central element, it will enhance the care of the other aspects of my life. And what we feel is the most central element is the spiritual. But if I manage to have a discipline of care at that level, it's amazing how my sensitivity to care and the other aspects is enhanced. And one of the things I noticed over the past months, I didn't make the suggestion, I didn't say anything, but the owners of the facility I work at, the fitness facility, very early on, they came to me and said, knowing it's an interest of mine, and said, could you start to provide online meditations to our membership? At first, it was 3 or 4 times a week. It's now settled into twice a week. they really recognize the importance of care at that central level. And we started to notice a bit of crossover, that those who did this in this area tended to be able to take care in other areas as well. So looking at the spiritual, how might that affect the other levels of care? And we'll come back to the spiritual in just a moment. But if we start with the physical, what does spirituality have to do with the physical? Because I hear so much or feel so much in what souls share, that there's a sense these are disconnected. And sometimes even that the physical is the enemy to spiritual progress or care, that they're two completely separate things. There's no integration between the two. And I have found it so much the opposite, so much accomplished, so different. Now that could be just that my life is a story of seeming opposites blending together all the time. I remember when I was training and I would be in ballet, and one part of the day I'm going to ballet class, another part of the day I'm going to track and field practice. And I really didn't want to tell the coaches of each, because they felt these should not be combined. That track and field will shorten your muscles, it will shorten your range of motion. It's a completely different training principle to ballet, where you want long muscles, lots of range of motion. And yet I found, wow, do these ever complement each other? They're not at all at odds. In fact, they gave me a greater level of care. I was less prone to injury in either, because they complemented each other so well. And I feel that's the case with spirituality, the self, and this physical body, care for the physical body. There's a principle called detached observer or awareness. And again, mentioned earlier, that when you walk into a mind-body class, it feels like a meditation studio. This idea of awareness is a principle that is absolutely essential in self-care and can close the gap between perceived benefit and actual benefit, to be so aware. And awareness is something that we really, really refine, nurture, and develop through spirituality. I remember sometimes I would be in ballet class. Ballet dancers have a very heightened level of awareness, in this case, body awareness. But I would be in ballet class as a child. And when you came into the center work, away from the bar to the center work, in the second half of the class, we would be split into groups, because there would not be enough space for us to do the center work together. So we would be told what we're going to do and then split into 2 or 3 groups. And the instruction was, if you're not actually presenting at that moment, you should be practicing on your own at the side. So you'd go to the back of the room, there would be mirrors, and you would stand there. And the idea of the mirror was not to just kind of enjoy your appearance, but to use it as a tool for self-correction. So the idea was that you'd been given instruction and you'd practice with the aim to align with that instruction. And that requires incredible awareness to be able to see what's happening, the difference between the direction I've been given and what I'm actually doing, and to close that gap, to know how to close that gap. This is a whole nother talk about our problems in following directions. But when we heighten that awareness, it actually makes it easier for me to know where I need to place my attention or care. And so when it comes to the physical body, usually we wait until we feel pain before we do something, until there is a crisis before we do something. But if I have this heightened awareness, this sensitivity, I can tell much earlier on what is going on and even maybe how to correct it, how to care for the body. I once had a conversation with a nutritionist, and she was giving some lovely talks about different principles of proper nutrition. And we were chatting on the side, and I was just sharing that I really felt it was so important to really listen, because every body is different. Really listen to what the body is asking for, not be deceived by desires, what I'm addicted to, but what it actually needs. Is it thirsty? What it actually needs. And she said, yes, there's a whole body of nutrition on that called intuitive eating. So as I become more quiet, I'm actually more sensitive to the care of the body, what it actually requires, whether it's the alignment or any other issues that might come up. Very recently, I went to donate blood, and I'm telling this story. Hopefully you will not. If you do donate blood, you will continue to do so. This was very specific to me. So I went to donate blood, and when you do it, sometimes there can be bruising after, and everyone knows that. But the blood donation went a little funny. It was clear at the time something was a little funny. And the days after, it did start to bruise. But the interesting thing is the bruising didn't go away. It just got worse and worse and worse until the entire lower arm felt like it had a tattoo. It was completely covered with beautiful colors of bruising, and it was spreading and spreading. And the bicep was funny. There was burning, tingling. It just was odd. Now, I do have colleagues that are doctors, and they were looking at it and saying, oh yeah, no, it's fine. It's getting better. And, I'd be very quiet in meditation, and the deep feeling is there is something not right. And it's not just because it's right. There's just something not right. And I'd go to my doctor and say, I just don't, and she's lovely. And she was like, okay, but I think this is. So I kept going back to her saying, I think there's something. And finally she said, okay, all right, we're sending you for an ultrasound. And I had this lovely technician do the ultrasound. She spent an hour going over every vein. At the end of the hour, they did find something, and it was so deep in the arm, it could easily be missed. And once that was seen, understood, then we could properly care for it. And the doctor afterwards said, thank you so much for staying with this, because I really was going to dismiss it. So being so sensitive to the care of the body is heightened when I have this spiritual awareness. And the same goes for the mental care. Mental care means that I'm able to, again, observe what's going on with my mind, understand it, and have a sense of how to care for it. Now, in my family, I do have direct relatives who have various mental things going on. And one of them is, we call it memory care. And I found it so interesting. One is autism, one's memory care, one's bipolar. So 3 very different profiles of different mental patterning. And I found the memory care one so interesting, because the soul has been quite aware of what's going on and was therefore able to embrace disciplines that they could care for themselves as their memory is deteriorating. It was quite powerful to observe. Again, they have a very strong spiritual foundation. They were able to observe. It's very unusual to observe your own memory loss and be able to care for it. Now they're at the point where perhaps there's not much of that ability, but I go in there and get such a sense of what should we do here today. Again, I'm no expert on that type of care. But if we become very quiet, still connected to something authentic, it's amazing how perceived benefit and actual benefit start to agree. Emotional care same principle. Emotional, again, is these feelings, these emotions that come, being able to observe them, not repress them, observe them, understand them, and know the best way to care for them. This is for the self, but also the empathy for others. Amazing how heart care is enhanced when there's that strong spiritual foundation. So what is that spiritual foundation that's at the center of self-care, of being able to close the gap between perceived benefit and actual benefit, so that I am investing in something that is truly caring for the self, not distorted by ego and desires and attachments, etc., but truly caring. Well, if ego is at the heart of that distortion, that is embracing disciplines that could be actually harmful, or putting discipline aside completely, coming up with so many reasons why I can't care for myself at this time. If ego is behind that, then it's pretty clear that the opposite drive would be behind self-care and actual benefit. If ego is about valuing the self for all the wrong reasons, and then spirituality is learning to value myself for all the right reasons. Ego gives us that sense of value through the external, through temporary aspects, whether it's the body I'm in, the people I know, the things I have, or the positions I hold. Whereas spirituality allows us to get right to the heart of the self, our own intrinsic goodness. By saying I am spirit or soul, I get to dive into the timeless value of the self that transcends all the things that come and go. And so at the heart, once I start to cultivate this true sense of my own value or self-respect, this is the main principle of self-care, is that it be driven by self-respect. I have seen souls with self-respect not succumb to competition, not get pulled into the quantity trap, but really focus on quality. They care for other people, but they're not so much affected or concerned about getting that validation from others. They have that intrinsic source of self-value. It is so critical to self-care. So perhaps the first discipline of self-care is to cultivate that self-respect. Once it starts to develop, our sensitivity to emotional care, mental care, and physical care, we start to make choices that we don't just perceive as beneficial, but are actually of benefit. So there'll be days when I go in and say, you know what, we're not going to push ourselves hard today, or it's going to be an off day. It takes incredible discipline for some souls not to work out. Their ego is so addicted to the validation they get from working out, that external validation, they can't stop. So it takes remarkable self-respect to give the body that time to restore and recover. It takes remarkable self-respect to be able, without any violence, to engage in those different forms of management, whether it's nutrition, resources, finances, mental care, creative care, finding time for that creative care of the mind, finding time for that quiet emotional care of the self. So really the seed of self-respect is everything when it comes to principles or disciplines of self-care. So I'm going to end there and invite Usha back, I believe, to see if there's any questions or sharing from you.
Thank you very much. There are just a question I do have for you. And the question for you is, you mentioned physical fitness. And I know that it's also recommended by doctors and to do exercises to build your confidence. And not only that, exercise also releases the happy chemicals in your body as well. Can you kind of touch on that, how that affects the spirit as well at the same time as the happiness?
You know, it's so interesting. When I was a child, we used to dance a lot, like just, you know, put the Jackson 5 on and prance around the living room. And the idea was, I am happy and I happen to be dancing. Mm-hmm. And what we start to notice after a while is that I'm dancing in order to make myself happy. So it kind of gets reversed. But one of the classes, it's so interesting, your question, one of the classes that we do offer is a dance-inspired class. And I don't say this, the participants in the class say this, because sometimes souls will look in the window watching it. You can tell they so badly want to come in because it looks so fun. And it's so like the child is unleashed, but they won't come in. They will not come in because their ego won't, they're so afraid of looking stupid, right? So they're actually denying themselves. And the ones that are in the room, it's fascinating what happens because you see all the dimensions, the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual being addressed in such a healthy way. Yes, there is serotonin release that makes us feel so happy. There's a biochemical release. But they've even found when they work with those who have dementia, that one of the most powerful activities is to dance in a social setting. You're hitting all of the you're checking off all the boxes. The social setting is huge. This period of isolation has been extremely debilitating for those with memory issues. It is death for them to be isolated. So that piece is addressed. Somehow dancing specifically, they've noticed, is the one. There's a lot of other physical things you can do, but dancing specifically seems to have huge benefits. And there are reasons. When you're working out, there are biochemicals released, but also the nervous system and the fasciae are also affected. And those systems are super sensitive. The fasciae, which is on the frontier of study right now, can even have emotional response before the nerves even are hit. It's really hypersensitive. And fasciae is everywhere in the body, everywhere. It's actually, I mean, I don't know if you've ever wondered why your heart doesn't fall down, your livers, all your organs, because they're just floating in there. Fasciae, slings of fasciae are holding them in place. It is everywhere. And you cannot address fasciae by drinking water. That's not how you can keep it hydrated or supple or healthy. Care for it. You have to move it around through different planes and dimensions, which little children do naturally because they go around like this. And adults are like this. Our fasciae is slowly dying a slow death. So movement, dance particularly, because I see some souls go in, they squat, they're moving their body in a single plane. Whereas dance forces so many systems to fire, just the nature of it. It's amazing. So it's definitely helping physically. And there is a mental component because of the choreography. Even counting backwards while you're walking is going to help your mental situation. We need to give complexity to our brain. So choreography is fantastic. Compound exercises are fantastic for mental care, just to get stimulation. So they're getting that benefit in a choreography class. But of course, then there is the social support. You've got other people who have thrown themselves into this situation where we're willing to look stupid together. And this creates a special bond. So that's so wonderful. But the wonderful thing I've noticed in the class is they are kind to each other. I've never, I remember one year, it's notorious in ballet classes. I'm sorry to say this, but they are hyper competitive. And I remember one year I was at a dance studio taking jazz classes, and I hadn't been dancing for a while. I was really not confident with the dance. And so I was taking the safe class, which was intermediate. This is where most people went, the intermediate class. It was safe. And right after the intermediate class was the advanced jazz class, smaller number of students. They were professional dancers who were just keeping their skills sharp. So they would watch our class at the end, and then their class would follow. And I don't know why, because I wasn't doing anything fantastic. I was keeping things very safe, but they'd often come up to me after and said, you should really come to the advanced class. And, the confidence just wasn't there. It's like, but I was so touched because I was used to dancers being so competitive, and they were so supportive. They kept saying, you should really come. You would be wonderful. You should really. I was like, who are you people? Where did you come from? Their hearts were so kind. So one day they broke me down and I went to the advanced class, and I thought, this is going to be the end of my life. Ego was going crazy. And they were so happy to see me. I was like, this is so weird. They were so happy to see me. And, they would do a pirouette, a turn on one leg, and they do like 6 or 8 of them. And I might turn out a couple, and they'd come up to me and say, that was amazing. That was amazing. I'm just like, oh. So this idea of a kind culture in the class, which we see, it's unique to dance classes that we have, because the ego is left at the door, the spirituality is able to unlock. We have these beautiful hearts that ego really shuts down. So we get very competitive, very cautious of each other. We're not quite genuine. These souls, if someone new walks into the class, they are like so supportive, so kind, so sweet, so that their heart, their spiritual heart, not just their physical heart, but their spiritual heart is also getting a great workout. Anytime we can have that social kindness together in a physical fitness class, we're hitting all of the boxes, the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So it's big.
Thank you. The other question I have is the type of foods we have has a big impact on the spirit and the body. Can you kind of touch on that, how that affects us mentally and physically?
Right. Yeah. Definitely physically, the food piece is huge. And there's a very popular magazine in Western Canada called Impact. And they feature elite athletes, and they always have a recipe section. And it's been around for 30 years now, always had a recipe section, but their recipes were always non-vegetarian. And one year I wrote, because I thought, there are actually vegetarian athletes out there, and I'm sure they would love some support in terms of recipes, because it's quite high demand, and there's a deep myth that you must eat non-vegetarian to excel in athletics and etc. So they hunted down a single athlete, and they featured his story, and that was the end of it. And they went back to non-vegetarian. And then a few years ago, it was odd. I started to notice it was like a 180. They suddenly only had not just vegetarian, but vegan, diehard vegan recipes. And they started to feature vegan athletes and their experience. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about they have better recovery. Some of them were vegan from birth, some became vegan. And they talked about how it enhanced their athletic performance. It was the weirdest thing. I thought, what happened? Why were they so diehard non-vegetarian? What happened that they suddenly went vegan, this recipe, this magazine? And eventually the editor wrote a letter in the magazine. And what she shared was that a few months back, her husband had a cardiac event. And again, this discipline, what is going to be beneficial? They realized they had to change their lifestyle. They're already active. So all that was left was nutrition. They had to change their lifestyle. And they did a complete 180 out of love for her husband. She did a complete 180 and only pure vegan. I hear so many going in this direction. And you literally are lighter when you have that kind of diet. So that's on a very physical level, the benefits of checking the diet and what you're asking the body to digest and how it affects performance. But also, so much about the vibration that goes into the food as well is super, super important. And that's, again, where spirituality excels. It looks at what's the awareness with which I'm caring for anything that has to do with the body. I wouldn't even just say food, finance, facilities, everything, how you handle your device, how you arrange your workspace. You want to create a very clean, light vibe with everything that's going on with the body. So when it comes to food, I always make sure the space is super clean before I prepare anything. Super clean. My roommate's a nurse, so that works out well because she likes to sterilize everything. So everything's super clean. And we like to keep things super light in terms of what we eat, but also the preparation of it. So we want to make sure we're in a good state of mind when we're preparing food because we know that's going to go into the food. And elite athletes are super, super sensitive to what goes in their body. So they feel everything from the chemical composition of the food to the vibration of the food. So they're always joking with me because I eat very, very non-spicy, very light food. And everyone's always joking with me. I said, look, I tell you, if you put something else in there, it's not going to be good. So I like to keep things really light in terms of content, but also in terms of the care. So to have good disciplines of food prep in the kitchen from your attitude to content is important.
Thank you very much. On that note, Sister Judi, I'd like you to take us into how we can go into that deep core you talked about earlier on and the values that are within ourselves. Can you talk us through how we can emerge them? And over to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Usha.
Thank you.
My first thought, as I'm seated here, is I become very aware of the body, very aware of its presence, its outline, its form, its weight in the chair. Very aware of the body. Is there pain anywhere in the body? I might make adjustments, but the focus here is just to observe the body. At first, I observe on a very gross level, on the surface, but then I start to go deeper. I start to become aware of the breath of the body. Just observing the lungs breathing, that rhythm of inhale and exhale. Watching the lungs breathe. All this time, it's been happening naturally. I can be just the observer. And then I become even more subtle. Can I observe the heartbeat of the body, that physical heart beating? I have to become very quiet, very introverted to detect that physical heartbeat. My eyes don't have to close, but my attention has to become quite focused and still. And now that my attention is so subtle, I can move it to the most subtle place of all, to the self. I, the one who is observing. The body cannot observe me, but I can observe the body. Tracing my attention to that place from where the observing seems to originate, where the thoughts originate, that place behind the forehead, where I, the thinker, the observer, is seated. Deep inside, that invisible space of my inner world in which I reside. Going to the very heart of my inner world, the very center, the very core, to experience the depths of the self. I, the thinker, the being, the one that gives life to this body. It's like entering a sacred space deep inside, where I exist in my most pure, timeless state. Coming to the very point of the self. It's a very subtle, delicate experience of the self. I'm just a spark of life. But how precious life is. There is nothing in the outer physical world that is more precious than life itself. Me. And although the body has incredible capacities with all its muscles, bones, ligaments, tendons, organs, cells, the true values of life do not reside in the body. There is no anatomy book out there that will speak of the body having parts such as love, compassion, kindness. Those capacities belong to me, the being. They are innate to me. This depth of care, of love, of kindness. Sometimes these capacities become merged when I forget myself and think I am the image. But when I become very still, go inside, I can reconnect with the wonder, the beauty, the value of the self. I, the being, in which is contained all quality of life. Om Shanti. Sorry, Usha, you may just have to unmute for us.
There we are. Thank you. Sister Judi, thank you so much. One thing I did take from you today, which is very important, that everything stems from ourselves. everything starts from a thought, and you build on that. And everything that you think is about yourself and your self-care. It's not about the external. It's always the internal. Work on the internal, and the outside will be looked after. And that's what I took, and I will actually keep working on that. And you did a beautiful meditation to finish off the session. And want to say thank you so much for being with us. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Usha, and the whole team for inviting me. I was deeply touched and honored, and I loved being with all of you. And who knows, maybe one day we'll physically be.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a shame that we had to finish because there's so many questions that even I wanted to ask you, but maybe on another time. But thank you so much. And it's been so lovely having you with us. You've been such a warm speaker for us tonight. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and sweet dreams to everyone. Do take care of yourselves.
Stay warm. Okay. Okay. Shanti, everyone. Just to let you know, next week we have Sister Mira from Slough who's going to be joining us, and her topic is going to be inner calm and outer chaos. Same time, same place on this channel. So we'll see you all next week. And Sister Judi, thank you so much once again. Take care. Shanti.